Does this scene look familiar? Take this simple test. Do you have trouble absorbing the latest Republican talking points without completely losing control? Does your blood pressure go off the scale high at the sight of Dick Cheney? Is your TV in danger from flying objects when tuned to Fox News? Do you have frequent feelings of despair and hopelessness at the prospect of 3 more years of the Bush administration? Do you yell and gesticulate wildly every time Bush links Iraq with 9/11? It's a common problem, and there are millions like you all over the country. Your reactions are normal, but they are also unhealthy. Frustration and stress caused by the actions of powerful but very stupid and dishonest people can affect your health and shorten your life. What can you do about it? Countries who have a free and independent press and a functional democracy, where votes are counted and representatives have to answer to an informed electorate, can change the conditions that lead to your frustration. But after Ronald Reagan killed off the equal time doctrine and the election rigging in Florida in 2000 and Ohio in 2004, forget that. But there is good news. Introducing Neocontrol from Megameds. Neocontrol is a medical breakthrough that can relieve those feelings of frustration and rage in the face of indefensible abuse of power and political double-dealing that has become the hallmark of our government. Its patented ingredients will reduce the inanities of Fox News to a dull roar, background noise. Even the feckless whimpering of tame Democrats won't set you off. Neocontrol will relieve those feelings of rage and powerlessness in the face of the latest outrage committed in your name by Bush, Cheney, or Rumsfeld. The tales of torture coming from Guantanamo and Abu Ghraib will bounce off your untroubled brow, and you can take the inane bloviating of Ann Coulter or Bill O'Reilly in stride. Neocontrol acts as an outrage suppressor and simultaneously reduces your inclination to use logic and seek out facts. In short, you will achieve the sheep-like complacency of Bush's base. So ask your doctor if Neocontrol is right for you. Taken daily, it will ensure you remain calm, no matter what Dick Cheney calls Patrick Leahy. Ask for a free trial of Neocontrol today. Available in capsules or suppositories.
Caution, Neocontrol is not for everyone. Do not use Neocontrol if you believe that moral action by the government is the responsibility of every citizen. Neocontrol may cause dandruff, projectile vomiting, flat feet, muscle pain, headache, loose oily stools, flatulence, hives, impotence, exploding spleen, and chilblains. Do not mix with alcohol or crystal meth.
A local TV station is cited for broadcasting fake news, and we're not talking about Jon Stewart or Stephen Colbert.
What was the margin of victory for the Democrats in the 2006 election? Did Karl Rove miscalculate? We'll show you some evidence. Hi, I'm Verna Lankford. I'm sitting in for Shelton Lankford this week.
I'm Joel Roache. Welcome to Real Talk. More than 75% of Americans get their news from local TV and 70% from network news or 24-hour cable. On the other hand, according to a study by researchers at UCLA and Seton Hall University, the TV stations in large cities, in 8 large cities, spend as 8 times as much air coverage on car crashes and fires in the month leading up to the election as they did on the campaign. This is an old complaint, of course. We know about the corporate media. But now, lately, a new concern has arisen, and that is the use of video news releases. These are used by many stations reaching millions of people. It's a broadcast something called news, which is paid for and produced by the people the news is about. Pre-packaged broadcast segments designed to look like television news stories that are funded by and scripted by corporations or government clients. News reports produced and paid for by the subjects of the news. This first came to public attention when the Medicare D program was passed back in 2004. And the government produced a video news release promoting the program just as the party was gearing up for the election. It's a controversial program. It provides medications, prescription medications for elders, but it also provides billions of dollars to pharmaceutical companies and insurance companies. It's controversial, but this particular video had to say nothing about anything except the merits of the program. At a cost of $42,750 taxpayers' dollars, it was distributed to at least 40 stations in 33 markets. In it, a so-called reporter, in fact a publicist, a PR employee, named Karen Ryan, sings the praises of the program in a voiceover as the president signs the legislation. The General Accountability Office, the nonpartisan federal group that looks into things like this, found that it was illegal under federal law, a law that prohibits the use of federal money, your money, for publicity or propaganda purposes, quote, unquote. The Government Accountability Office called it covert propaganda and found it not strictly factual, with notable omissions and weaknesses. But the illegal part was that it failed to point out that it was in fact produced by the federal government. At about that time, Verna, that was about the same time of they call it the Armstrong-Williams scandal. Armstrong-Williams is as you know, is a conservative columnist he's supposed to be a columnist, you know, like any other pundit in the newspaper. But he produced several columns supporting No Child Left Behind, saying what a great program it was. What he didn't mention is that he had been paid by the federal government, are you ready for this? $240,000 to write those columns, which was scandal enough in itself. And there were others, were there not?
Right. Since that time, they've identified 2 additional ones that were at the same time that Williams was out there, but at that time they weren't really looking for them. One was Maggie Gallagher, which they diverted $41,500 from the welfare fund to help Bush's marriage initiative and abstinence and so on. The other one was Michael McCanus. He was actually paid to write religious and ethnic columns for 50 different newspapers. He was only actually paid $4,000, but he had $49,000 paid to his business, which is Marriage Savers, Inc. So
I'm sorry, what is the business again?
Marriage Savers, Inc. And this was
an
ethics and religion column that he was writing. So even though Williams had all the publicity, these 2 were out there doing the same thing at the same time, and they're looking into others.
Actually, it doesn't sound like exactly the same thing, because Williams was at least touting a government program, but these columns seem to be touting a value system, a way of looking at things.
Well, Maggie Gallagher, she was being paid through the Department of Health and Human Resources. So it's your tax money coming out of the welfare system, right? So it's still government tax money, our money, paid for the propaganda going to these PR people to promote Bush's agenda.
It gives a whole new meaning to the expression welfare queen, doesn't it?
Yes, it does.
Then in March of 2005, New York Times did a story on VNRs. That's what we're talking about, VNRs, video news releases. For instance, you have a film of jubilant Iraqi Americans thanking Bush for liberating their country before a camera crew in Kansas City. The camera crew, it turns out, comes from the government. Or a reporter calls the administration's, or a person calling himself a reporter, calls the administration's, quote, drive to strengthen airport security one of the most remarkable campaigns in aviation history. These things cost millions of dollars, taxpayer dollars, to propagandize for various government programs. Sometimes they are interviews with government officials where questions are scripted and rehearsed in advance, no critics, no hints of any mismanagement or waste or controversy, just a strict sales pitch. Now, it should be pointed out that they had these kinds of VNRs and stuff during the Clinton administration, but according to at least one report, Bush is spending about twice as much as Clinton did. That is $254 million in the first Bush term on public relations efforts such as this. An example, a report by WHBQ in Memphis, where a local reporter, mind you, narrates a story about the progress of Afghan women after the U.S. invasion, including interviews with women coming out of their burqas and going to work and school, showing that American intervention was spreading freedom, improving lives, and winning friends. What isn't mentioned is that the interviews are conducted by United States State Department contractors, who also, by the way, wrote the script for the reporter to read. One of these VNRs had a local connection. United States Department of Agriculture VNR ended up with Princess Anne, Maryland, and Pat O'Leary reporting for the U.S. Department of Agriculture. However, the VNR was distributed by a group called Ag Day, which is a syndicated agricultural news service which reaches about 160 stations. In that version, it ended up with Ag Day's Pat O'Leary. So you don't know that it was a federal employee who was making that statement. And of course, it's Department of Defense, the Department of State, all the departments do this. Now, when this came out, I think when it came out over the Medicare thing, yes, Congress passed a law mandating disclosure that these were government productions. But two things are worth mentioning. One is that the disclosure, that the law is apparently being pretty widely ignored. And the other is that the law, if I'm not mistaken, does not apply to corporate VNRs, which is a whole different story.
Right. Well, as soon as that law came out, though, Scott McClellan was the first one to come out when he was asked about the disclosure issues, and Scott McClellan said, no, that's not really necessary. It's not illegal not to do it. And then 2 days later, President Bush came out and reinforced that. So that's why, even though the law was there, you don't see a lot of the people doing the disclosure. Now,
was the law passed before or after they made these statements?
That was before they made the statements. They came out and blatantly said it doesn't apply to us.
Oh, I see.
We don't have to follow these rules.
Kind of a massive signing statement.
Yes, a verbal.
Congress has passed a law, but it doesn't apply to us, so we'll just move on.
Right. Now, in addition to the millions of dollars that were budgeted, there are 7 major corporations, right, or PR corporations now, that the House Committee is trying to investigate to find out exactly how they used these funds, where did they go, what were they used for. And there are 7 in particular that were given anywhere in the $23 to $25 million range apiece. One of them, though, I thought was very interesting, which was one of the smaller ones, was Barston Marsteller. They were given $1.9 million just to manage the communication during the anthrax scare. But they're the same company that was hired when the mad cow disease came out. They managed McDonald's, and would pay tax dollars to manage that information. Another one, Equals 3 Communication, was given $23.8 million.
Wait, slow down. $23.8 million.
Right. And
sounds like a bad day in Baghdad, but go ahead.
Well, but the government, when the House investigation and trying to find out how they use those funds, they would not disclose, and they still have not disclosed. And they, so even the government doesn't know where the money went or what it's being used for.
I wonder if this is distinctive of this administration. I never knew that if there's a disaster like Katrina or a scare like Mad Cow, that the government hires private firms to deal with the public relations fallout, to deal with getting information out about it. Do you have any idea whether this is common practice in all administrations, or is this part of this obsession with privatization on the part of the Republicans?
I believe it's part of the privatization because there hasn't been, if it has been out there, it's not been abused to the extent that it's currently that we're seeing. So people are actually starting to pay attention and look. And with the budget deficit, we're talking about millions and millions of dollars of our tax money being redirected from programs like the welfare. From I know another one of the PR firms was hired because they took away a lot of the military were promised health care for benefits for life, and they decided, oh, that's not cost effective anymore, and so they hired a PR firm to spend millions of dollars to work with these disgruntled service members because they're no longer getting free health care anymore. So they paid, you know, millions of dollars just to manage the disgruntled service members.
So they cut a program in order to save money, and then they spend money in order to soothe tattered nerves over the cutting of the program.
Absolutely. I mean, if the list of, through those 7 alone that these highlighted, of the different programs they touch, it's mostly also social programs that are being impacted and cut. So, you know, if we can, you know, take money from here to give to this, it's...
And then on top of that, they can't account for the money they've been given.
Right.
You've got one case of almost $2 million, another case is $23 million and change. It seems like kind of a miniature Halliburton operation.
All over the place.
Because the same thing's happening in Iraq. The money just billions of dollars just disappears, and nobody knows what happened to it.
There was a headline that was out there that says how they change your mind, propaganda that we pay for, and this is what it is. It's our tax money at work.
You pay for your own brainwashing. I wonder if that's covered under Medicare.
I doubt it. It's been kept in the program.
And what, okay, now this is just in some ways the tip of the iceberg so far as video news releases is concerned, because the overwhelming majority of video news releases are made for the purpose of private corporations, for the interests of private corporations. The Center for Media and Democracy, their website is www.prwatch.com. They've now done 2 studies, one last spring, and another one just in November, where they identified certain VNRs and tracked them to see where they were broadcast and how they were broadcast. They found that 77 stations, reaching over half the population, broadcast these corporate VNRs, and representing 49 clients, of whom 47 were private corporations. Here's one example was WTOK 11 in Meridian, Mississippi. The title was Global Warming, Hot Air, in which they ridiculed the notion that global warming was the cause of the severity of the various hurricanes. Now, in fact, that issue is, the issue of global warming is not controversial among scientists. But but the issue of whether or not it causes the hurricanes is, but not to WTOK 11 and in Meridian, Mississippi. And of course, what they failed to disclose is that the video news release, the whole program, was a production of a PR and lobbying firm with members among its clients. Are you ready? ExxonMobil, which doesn't like global warming, doesn't like the idea. And here in Salisbury, WBOC is also cited by this report for running 3 different corporate VNRs without any attribution as to where they came from. One of them had to do with, are you ready for this? National Pancake Week. Now, we called WBOC, tried to talk to the news director. We left a phone message, we left an email message. They didn't get back to us. This is we're now getting ready to show you the video of the video news release they ran for National Pancake Week.
A stack of pancakes sounds good right about now. You may not know it, but this week is National Pancake Week, a special time set aside to honor the lowly flapjack and find out how it can be dressed up for its big week of celebration. Mike Morris takes a look.
For so long, the pancake has been relegated to early morning meals and the perennial breakfast food staple. But that's about to change, with new recipes appearing on the internet that might just turn the flapjack into an everyday and every meal food. And the good news is that not only can pancakes be dressed up with fruit and low-fat yogurt as toppings, there is now a mix that makes pancakes that will make your heart happy.
All of us have become so concerned about our health and what we eat, but we still want to enjoy a good meal. So Bisquick Heart Smart has created a new recipe with Heart Smart all-purpose mix that is low-fat, has 0 grams of trans fat, is naturally cholesterol-free, and a good source of calcium.
And more traditional pancakes don't have to be just plain boring. For instance, head south of the border for Mexican corn cakes, Or get a taste of just around the corner springtime with a blueberry pancake brunch topped with chilled low-fat yogurt.
By visiting BettyCrocker.com, you can find lots of traditional family favorites as well as some new ideas, like orange toffee pancakes, banana split pancakes topped with whipped cream, and the kids will love this, PBJ stacks.
One more thing. A pancake dinner can be made in just minutes, and with the right toppings on the table, everybody can make theirs just the way they want it. This is Mike Morris.
Again, where's our pancakes?
He's pretty good though. With the flip.
Yeah, he's pretty good.
I have it all over the stove. If
Yeah,
they tried
I
that.
can't quite get that down. Mine are always burned.
I'm sorry, but this so-called news story looked to me like a commercial. There's that big Bisquick box in the back, and everything is Bisquick recipes. You're referred to a what is it, General Foods or Betty Crocker website. They got a free 2-minute commercial, and WBOC's logo was in front of it, was it not? I think when it was finally broadcast.
Yes.
Yeah, we have a picture of that, I think. The same so-called reporter behind a WBOC logo. Let's look at that for just a second. You see what I'm saying? All of a sudden, Mike Miller, is that his name? All of a sudden, Mike Miller is on the WBOC staff.
Well, what's interesting is that some of these stations like WBOC, they go out of the way to make it look like a local news story, like they had done the research.
Now, this is very important.
And there's very, very few, if any, that actually validate any of the data that's being, or the information that's being presented.
They don't have the resources to do that kind of research.
And they're not getting paid not to. They're getting paid to run the
which is one of the reasons. Which is one of the reasons they use these things. And BOC is right up there in using them according to some numbers you have.
The recent list of the investigation that's ongoing, there were, of the 77 that you mentioned, the most egregious offender was a station in Oklahoma City. They had 6 uses during this time frame. WBOC was tied for second place in the number of offenses, meaning 3 over the last 12 months, tied with 3 other states.
And that's only the VNRs which the Center for Media and Democracy tracked. There were there may have been others that we won't even know about. It's important to understand that in April 2005, the FCC issued a public statement that all TV material, all material appearing in such broadcasts should be attributed to whoever actually produced them. That was in 2005. Now, after last winter's or last spring's revelations by the Center for Media and Democracy, the FCC has launched an investigation. It has asked for materials, copies of the VNR, everything having to do with these broadcasts from the stations involved. I had wanted to ask the news director of WBOC if he had gotten such a request and what he had done to respond to it, but as I said, I was unable to get in touch with him. It's important to understand that the issue here is not whether these things should be broadcast. We have freedom of expression. You can broadcast anything you want to. The idea is to add to it a disclosure of who produced it, who paid for it, whose interests are being served by it. The public has a right to know who is trying to persuade them. Finally, to put this in context, 80% of American media now is owned by half a dozen big corporations. They could all fit in Shelton's dining room. Their representatives could. Now we're told the corporate headquarters does not control what is broadcast, but now we also find out that between corporate headquarters and the government, they are actually producing it. All right? Perhaps it's a small percentage of what is being produced now, but I'm wondering if someday we will look like those countries where all information is filtered through a Ministry of Information. In our case, it'll be a combination of government and corporate interests that decide what we get to see and what we get to know about where it comes from. So stay tuned to Real Talk. We'll keep watching on this issue and keep informing you as we find out more. Hello friends, here at Book Talk today we're going to talk about a book that goes back to the election of 2004. After that election, an awful lot of liberals felt they'd just as soon move to Canada, that America had been irrevocably handed over to a coalition of corporate greed and religious zeal, and there was just no place for them anymore. Fortunately, Canada's a little too cold and they stayed. But the book had already been written. The title was Wait, Don't Move to Canada. Still is that, as a matter of fact, by Bill Scher, who is the executive editor of a blog called liberaloasis.com. So today we're going to talk about this book, and I have with me Kate McQueen, who is a member of the Central Committee of the Democratic Party of Worcester County. She has a BA and MA in Political Science and International Relations, but spent much of her life as a master electrician and worked promoting the energy efficient building construction. Well, Kate, is the book out of date? We just won big, did we not? No reason to move to Canada.
I do not believe the book is out of date. I think it's more imperative that we read it and act on it now, because the Democrats have taken the Congress, but it is imperative that we liberals and progressives and people on the left hold the Democrats' feet to the fire to ensure that our agenda is brought to fruition. As long as we on the left are pushing, we will receive compromises in Congress that we can live with. Currently, we have no means to get any kind of legislation or public policy that we can live with.
Now, the previous Congress, under the previous Congress, the Republican Congress, one of the Republican leaders said that bipartisanship was equivalent to date rape. The Democrats weren't allowed to do absolutely anything.
That's
well,
correct.
now that they're allowed to do something, we want to make sure they actually do something. How will this book help us do that?
I think the book gives those of us at the grassroots level some really good tools to make sure that our points of view stay in the spotlight through the media, through our local media. We can write letters, we can call reporters to task when they are misrepresenting the facts, when they are not giving us the information that we need. We need to make sure that the media stays
The book also makes a point of saying when the reporters do something right, we should be sure and tell them about them and encourage them to do it some more.
Absolutely.
That they really are responsive in some way or another.
Absolutely.
Sometimes.
Absolutely. I think this book also gives us some tactics to perhaps start grassroots organizing again around, it talks a bit about demonstrations and rallies and vigils, and making sure that we have a clear message of what it is we want.
Now let's talk about that message somewhat, because the book emphasizes, in the first place, not being embarrassed about being a liberal anymore, and
Absolutely.
to rebrand what gets called the left and reframe the issues.
Yes.
Can you give us some examples of that?
Well, for one thing, I think one of the most important things the book says is that when we talk about the government, we need to talk about our government.
Just one little word.
Our government. We must never let the Republicans talk about the bad government again, because it is our government. And we have to make our government do what we need.
Yeah, our government, and we should push the notion that it is, according to Scher, representative, responsive, and responsible.
Exactly. That's what we need to promote. We don't have that yet.
Yeah, right. I don't know if I got this out of this book or somewhere else, but I just read or heard recently there is somebody in the government or somewhere that maybe it's the Gallup people, every year do a poll. They ask the American people, do you feel that your government is trying to do its best for you? Some kind of question like that. And in 1965, 75% of the electorate answered yes to that question, and continued to answer yes until about 1980, when Reagan based his campaign on the government is not the solution, the government is the problem. And so for the last 20 years, we've either had people with that attitude or people trying to pander to that attitude, like Bill Clinton.
Yes.
And so now nobody trusts the government anymore. And lo and behold, it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy and we get Katrina.
Absolutely. Again, that's why it's good to go back to what this book is saying and talk about our government. Our government hasn't been working for us. Our government is being starved because of these massive tax cuts that go to, huge corporate donors of the Republican Party and the very wealthy in this country.
Well, this was an announced policy. Grover Norquist called it "starve the beast."
Absolutely. And it's clear that when George W. Bush took the election in the year 2000, he had no desire, no interest in governing. He had interest only in dismantling government, and that is exactly what he's done. So we on the left, we progressive, we liberals, and hopefully most of us Democrats must demand that we get our government back and that our government be funded to do what it is we, the people, need done.
So the question is not so much how big or small do we want the government to be, but what do we want it to do? In the book, Cher tells the story of a politician who's at an airport in Arkansas or Oklahoma, and some lady comes up to him and says, "Now, don't you let the government get hold of my Medicare." I mean, all this talk about how terrible liberals are, and yet people would kill to keep Medicare.
Absolutely.
They will vote, they will put in the doghouse any politician who wants to abolish Social Security, unemployment insurance, housing assistance, all of these things food stamps, all of these things that we take for granted. Everybody's for them, and then they'll turn around and say, "Oh, liberals are terrible." I don't understand. For instance, some polls have shown that 93% of the people want to protect the environment. 92% want to keep tabs and regulate big corporations and powerful individuals who may abuse their position. 88% want to ensure equal opportunity for everyone. 87% want to guarantee a quality public education. That is, the public is liberal, and yet somehow they don't know it.
Well, yeah, I think the problem there is that our tax structure is not equitably utilized in this country, so that those who make more don't necessarily pay more in taxes, which if we were to equalize the tax structure, I think that our government could do for the people what we want done.
It's interesting, there's a term for making the ability to pay a criterion in how much you pay. It's called progressive taxation. That's a technical term from economics.
Absolutely.
It's called progressive. Well, okay. So the real question is, what do we want our government to do, and who's going to pay for it, and how much is going to be paid for it? And that's the way we need to frame things. But I've got several problems. One is the Democratic Party itself, which seems to be our only alternative. To give a very specific example, the Democrats in the House just elected as their majority leader a guy who supported the war until he just simply couldn't do it with a straight face anymore, and that's something for Steny Hoyer. He can keep a straight face. This same guy voted for the bill that was written by the banks and the credit card companies to strip bankruptcy protection from millions of Americans. The people in charge of our party, or what we like to be our party, seem to think they have to constantly drift to the right to win. How do we turn that back?
Well, we certainly have to activate those of us that are on the left. We have to stop sitting around and intellectualizing. And I actually believe that the election last week or 2 weeks ago was helpful, because what it did, at least for me and those that I associate with, it lifted this cloud of depression off of our shoulders so that we now can begin to act. So if we see that there's a possibility for change, then we can begin acting on it. And I think it's only going to happen at the grassroots level. It means that small groups of people have to continue to keep track of what is said in our local medias. We have to respond to print journalism and television to ensure that we're getting the truth And when we see that we're not getting the truth, we need to push for the truth.
The other end of the question, the other problem, it seems to me, is that an awful lot of people, as long as the Democratic Party is led by people like Steny Hoyer and Ben Cardin, I was there 30 years ago, and you weren't in Maryland at that time, but Steny Hoyer and Ben Cardin were principals in taking our teacher retirement system and turning it. All the Democrats are bragging right now about improving it. Well, back in the 70s, overnight, they changed it from one of the best retirement systems in the country to one of the worst. I have an awful lot of people who say, hey, these Democrats are so bad, there's just no point in working for them.
Unfortunately, they're the only game in town right now. We only have a two-party system. We don't have the mechanism for a multi-party system in this country yet. And that may be something that we can accomplish down the road. But right now, we've got the two-party system, and it is imperative that we hold the Democrats' feet to the fire.
Yeah, Cher makes the point on the other hand, from the people I was just mentioning, that you can influence the party from within. We certainly can't have any impact on the party from without.
Correct.
But meanwhile, we're going to have to hold our nose.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I have been named to the Democratic Central Committee, as you mentioned at the beginning.
You just go in there with a clothespin on your nose.
Again, I'm pragmatic. I'm a pragmatic idealist, because I believe that currently we have to work through the system to make any change. And now that the Republicans are not in control of the Congress any longer, that we do have a chance. But it's going to take a lot of hard work. And it's going to take people at the local level expressing our views regularly, repeatedly, and consistently. For example, in Worcester County, in Ocean City, a small group of us are holding a peace vigil once a week, have been since the middle of April. And our group has grown. And we are getting a lot of attention. We just got written up in one of the local free newspapers, so that people are beginning to understand that there are a group of us who oppose the war, want peace, and will continue to make waves, will continue to be loud and present.
Are you aware of a similar vigil here in Wicomico County?
Yes.
Which has been going on at least since January 2003.
That's wonderful.
I wonder, though, how much impact that kind of thing has on the general public when you have the media consistently buying the neoconservative frames,
and the lies.
And the lies. Just sit there and
lie, and then the mainstream media picks up those lies and prints it as truth
without any kind of
investigation,
rebuttal,
anything.
Or anything like that. It all started for me with the Harry and Louise, was it Harry and Louise ads on the, which Harry and Louise sat there and said, if you bought into this program, you wouldn't be able to choose your own doctor. That was just a flat out lie.
Absolutely.
And the media were constantly talking about, wow, what an effective commercial. Yeah, it was effective. You can be real effective when you can lie and nobody calls you on it.
Exactly. And again, it's incumbent upon us progressives, us on the left, to speak truth to power. And that means not only our politicians and our elected officials, but the media, because they are probably more powerful than our elected officials. And we have to continue to confront the lies and the misinformation.
And it seems to me something, the book doesn't really cover this. I think maybe Cher is taking it for granted. This needs to be done in an organized way. One of my big disappointments of the last couple of years, since I've been trying to work with local progressives, is practically every meeting I go to, I say, we need a letter to the editor writing campaign where we decide what topics we're going to write on. We help each other write the letters. And so the newspaper every day gets a letter from us. And that we know that every day, as a matter of fact, those of us who are in the group know which letter it's going to be organized, to be focused. I can't get anybody off their butts. Liberals tend to like to sit around and talk.
That's true. Well, I've been a political activist for more than 30 years, and it has been evident from the very beginning of my political activism, is that a few people will rise to the forefront and be leaders, if you will, to try to then recruit others who feel the same way but maybe don't want to be as active, don't have as much time. So it's going to have to be the few of us, you and I, bringing in a few people and saying, please do this, write this letter for me next week or tomorrow.
Yeah, well,
and that's the only way that
if anything's going to work, that's the only thing that'll work. I'm not utterly convinced that it will work because I'm not utterly convinced you can get people to do it. It's been very discouraging on my part. But what we need to do, let's summarize for the book. We need to reframe, rebrand, make clear what we stand for, and get off our butts and go out and do something about it in an organized way, in the full knowledge that we're not going to win in 24 hours.
Absolutely.
We need to impact the media. We need to impact the Democratic Party. You can't influence the party from the outside just because you don't like everybody in it. We can always tell people, well, if you don't like the Democrats, we can always go back to the Bushies of this world.
That's right.
And the book makes a big deal. Let's just take a minute or two to talk about the role of the blogosphere, the role of the internet, because the book talks a lot about that.
I have to say that I'm a Luddite when it comes to the blogospheres.
Luddite? You mean you would blow them up?
No. It's just that I do a lot of reading, I do a lot of thinking and talking with friends. I don't participate in the blogs.
I don't either. I don't even read them because they're just boring.
I know.
We're left or right.
Part of what I fear about the internet, and have for a number of years, is that anybody can write anything. And again, we're not getting facts necessarily. We're not getting the truth necessarily. So I'm still back to where we need to work at the grassroots level.
There are a lot of progressive websites though, where you do get facts and you can get information.
And that's very important.
It's absolutely crucial, because otherwise you're stuck with the New York Times and the Washington Post, which are supposed to be liberal.
Absolutely, absolutely, and that's a joke. The thing that was most important in this book for me is the representation of our progressive principles as being representative government, so that all the people are represented, a responsive government which meets the concerns of we the people, and a responsible government that can be held accountable for managing our resources, both financial, energy, environmental resources, fairly and well.
Competently. No more.
And that's the most important thing I got from
No
this
more
book.
horse wranglers in charge of FEMA.
Absolutely.
Wait, don't move to Canada, ladies and gentlemen. The subtitle is A Stay and Fight Strategy to Win Back America. We've been talking with Miss Kate McQueen about it today. It's not expensive. Get it at Atlantic Bookstore for a very reasonable price. I suggest you read it, think about it, act upon it. Kate, thank you very much for being with us today.
Thank you, Joel.
Hope to have you back sometime.
Thank you.
Do you find yourself gulping down neo-control by the handful during the election season? Are you a blue person living in a red state? Are your friends and neighbors crowding their lawns with Republican yard signs? Remember, it's dangerous to your health to let rage and frustration build up indefinitely. You don't need to suffer anymore. We're introducing 2 new products from Megameds, Neo-Control Red State and Neo-Control Election Ease. Neo-Control Red State is made for people who reside in Zombieland full-time. If your only alternative seems to be selling the homestead, packing up, and hitting the road Beverly Hillbillies style, You can now unpack your bags. Neo Control Red State will deliver a full dose of calming relief right to your fevered brain through a patented time-release medication that will make you fit right in with your neighbors. You can focus on activities like dusting furniture and polishing your shoes, and pastimes like watching the daytime TV shows without being distracted by the latest news from Iraq or congressional pedophiles. One capsule is good for 24 hours of pleasant living, untroubled by thoughts of politics, pedophiles, or Jack Abramoff. What do you need a constitution for anyway? How many times in the last 3 years have you looked around for your habeas corpus? Research has proven that if you haven't used something for 3 years, you probably don't need it. Regular Neo Control is formulated for the ordinary stresses most people in the reality-based community undergo in a country where 52% of the people routinely get it wrong. Red State is designed to provide relief to those who live among people who always get it wrong and are proud of it. Now, the other product we are announcing today is Neo Control Election Ease. Let's say you are a person with normal patriotic pride and a sense of civic duty. Exercising your right to vote used to involve taking a ballot into a private booth and making your selections. Then you deposited your ballot into a box where it stayed until other patriotic, civic-minded citizens removed it under the watchful eye of other citizens. And then they counted it and other ballots in public, tallying up the totals. You're now being asked to poke a finger at a computer screen, which may or may not register your poke correctly. There's nothing physical produced to reflect what you did. Your vote is in cyberspace in the tender care of a corporation. Does that bother you? Well, no need to worry. Your problem comes from a shortage of blind faith, what some call credulity. Some people have a lot of credulity and others not so much. You tend to look suspiciously on things that can't be seen or verified independently. You look at your receipt after using an ATM. You think that maybe your vote may not be scrupulously counted or cared for by a corporation with right-wing connections. Neo Control Election Ease will relieve those feelings by supplementing your natural credulity. You will accept things that you can't verify, and the distinction between reality and bogus explanations of how Diebold machines are hack-proof won't matter. You may even join a megachurch or send money to Jerry Falwell. So ask your doctor if these products are right for you. Neo Control, Red State, and Election Ease. Modern political life made easy by Megameds. Neo Control is available only by prescription. As with any powerful medicine, use it only as directed. Do not drive or operate heavy machinery while taking Neo Control. It may cause drowsiness.
The 2006 elections are over, and the Democrats won both houses. That's about as well as you can expect to do in an off-year election with a wildly unpopular president and a cascading tsunami of scandals erupting daily in the Republican Congress, right? Wrong. Average pre-election polls had Democrats ahead by double digits. Had that margin held up, it is entirely possible that a landslide of epic proportions could have swept a veto-proof Democratic majority into power to cause real problems for a lawless administration. You may recall that news accounts had Bush and Rove unaccountably optimistic going into the 2006 elections. Was it just whistling past the graveyard, or was there something more to it? Karl did claim ownership of the math going in, after all. It was eerily reminiscent of a statement made by Congressman Peter King of New York in 2004 that it was all over but the counting, and we'll take care of the counting. Did Karl screw up the math? Karl said just prior to the '06 election to NPR's Robert Siegel, "I'm looking at all these, Robert, and adding them up, and I add up to a Republican Senate and Republican House. You may end up with different math, but you're entitled to your math, and I'm entitled to the math." Here are some relevant numbers. The average lead nationwide for Democrats in congressional races, as measured in opinion polls immediately prior to the election, was 11.5%. Exit polls at 7 p.m. on Election Day 2006 tracked that number very closely. Unadjusted exit poll numbers were consistent with the pre-election polls, placing the Democrats in an 11.5% lead nationwide. But between 7 p.m. on Election Day and the finalized exit polls, the Democratic lead shrank by almost 4 percentage points. What caused the shrinking of the Democratic landslide to proportions of a welcome but modest off-year gain of marginal control? Do you remember 2004? According to exit polls on the evening of the election, Kerry had a 3% lead. George Bush had been informed by aides that it appeared he lost. He did not seem concerned or upset by this news. Did he or Karl Rove know something we did not? How did they know that the exit polls were wrong? Between 1 a.m. and the next morning, the 3% Kerry lead had melted away and become a 2.8% Bush victory. As we know, it all came down to Ohio, and thanks to Ken Blackwell and a host of problems that were well documented by John Conyers and Robert Kennedy, Ohio went to Bush. U.S. count votes analyzed the data they could obtain. Most of the detail that would permit an exhaustive analysis of the Edison-Matovsky poll data is held as proprietary by the sponsoring consortium of news organizations. Their analysis revealed that the odds of the exit polls being that far off in 3 crucial swing states was less than 1 in 330,000. Edison-Matovsky, again the polling company in 2006 as in 2004, attributed the erroneous 2004 poll data to oversampling of Democrats. Edison-Matovsky theorized that Bush voters were shy and reluctant to talk, but when U.S. count votes looked more closely at the data, they found that participants in the more Bush-friendly areas were on the contrary more willing to talk than in the Kerry districts. To avoid this issue in 2006, a question was used that established whether a respondent voted for Bush or Kerry in 2004. Using 49% Bush voters and 47% Kerry voters as the sample, closely matching the reported vote total in 2004, the results of the '06 should closely mirror the electorate and avoid the oversampling of one group or another. Of course, this assumes that the 2004 vote total was correct. As we have seen, the '04 had serious exit poll discrepancies, but for the sake of argument, we assume that Bush's margin was correct, a large leap of faith. If the exit polls were correct in the '04, it only increases the likelihood that the '06 election victory by Democrats was diminished by erroneous vote counts. By using this intrinsic yardstick method of weighting, the 11.5% Democratic margin holds up, matching the pre-election polls and the unadjusted polls reported by Edison-Matovsky at 7 p.m. on Election Day. The method has this advantage of consistency, unlike the forcing scenario used by the polling company. The polling companies have one ironclad rule, as apparently do all the major news outlets and the mainstream media. Vote totals reported in an election are always correct. Based on that assumption, exit polls that deviate from the reported result must be wrong. Therefore, the exit polls have to be brought in line with election results. How do they do it? Well, they do it by applying oversampling of, in this case and all recent cases come to think of it, Republicans, to force the desired result, i.e. a final exit poll that matches the reported election results. Edison-Matovsky had to inflate the Republican oversample to 49% to 43% instead of the 49 to 47% required to resemble the population of respondents. They had to double the margin of victory by Bush to force the exit polls in 2006 to conform to the reported vote total. This chart shows the pre-election opinion poll averages and the unadjusted exit polls in 2006 compared to the adjusted exit polls and reported vote. Remember, before 2000, exit polls were used to call the election by news organizations. They were regarded as the gold standard and still are by most of the world. We use them to judge the validity of everyone's elections except, curiously, ours. Since voting machines, exit polls have been prone to error, even though sampling techniques and statistical analysis is a respected science in other applications. Edison Matovsky is the acknowledged leader in this exit polling field. So was the election of 2006 a respectable Democratic victory, or a landslide denied by the means of election fraud? Remember how George Allen and Conrad Byrne, both Republicans who lost very narrow races to Democrats, quietly folded their tents and did not request a recount or investigation? How sportsmanlike and uncharacteristic of them. Could it be that they knew that investigators poking around the election could turn up more trouble? It appears that in 2006 the Democratic victory was due not to a clean election, but a case of insufficient theft. Karl was simply too optimistic and believed that stealing 4 to 6% would be enough, and it was, but only to prevent a landslide. Strangely enough, this phenomenon of wildly inaccurate exit polls has arisen in parallel with one major development: the pervasive use of direct recording equipment, DRE, electronic voting. Computer equipment from two companies, Diebold and ES&S, count 80% of the votes in the United States using software held as proprietary to their corporations. These companies, founded by brothers with ties to right-wing politics and the Republican Party, have co-opted the machinery of American politics and put it beyond the reach of local election officials or even states. It's time to get it back. To learn more, go to the website on your screen. I particularly urge you to visit and support TrueVoteMaryland.org. This organization has been on the front lines of the battle for transparency in elections and the requirement that elections be done in a manner consistent with ensuring that all who are eligible to do so may vote and be assured that their vote is counted. The vote is the most important part of the commons and the beating heart of our democracy. To entrust it to corporations, particularly partisan corporations, places this most treasured of our institutions in grave danger, and we as citizens must stand up and demand transparency and honesty in the administration of our elections. For Real Talk, I'm Shelton Lankford.
Thank you, Shelton. And I think we should remind our viewers that in last year's legislative session, the Maryland General Assembly passed a measure to provide voter-verified paper trails for our voting machines. But it was bottled up, lost, stymied in the Senate by the Democratic leadership. I hope our viewers will write their representatives in the state legislature and let them know that they care about this issue. We want our votes counted. And that's about all we have for today. Real Talk is going on hiatus now till sometime in February because I'm going to take a little trip to the other side of the world. Maybe I'll come back with something to tell you about Australia. Meanwhile, don't forget us. We'll be back. I'm Joel Roache.
And I'm Verna Lankford.
And this is Real Talk.